Speaker, I am delighted to speak on this historic piece of legislation. I am delighted to be here this evening to talk about the many changes that have happened as a result of the Select Committee process. But first, I want to make a few comments about how the Labour Party bailed on this process. And I want to give you a couple of incidents, Mr Speaker. Mr Twyford stands up in this House and talks about local democracy. Mr Twyford not only went out and protested while he was a member of a Select Committee, but he actually organised the protest, Mr Speaker. If that's not a constitutional outrage and if that's not a lack of democracy, I don't know what is, Mr Speaker. Secondly, Mr Speaker, it's very difficult to be lectured by the Labour Party about democracy when all we have to mention is this one phrase, Mr Speaker. This one phrase, the Electoral Finance Act, Mr Speaker. And Mr Chair, and our side of the House, we know it's very difficult to receive lectures about democracy from that side of the House after that piece of legislation. But, Mr Chair, what I do want to talk about is the wonderful provisions within this bill that are going to lead to greater democratic participation for Aucklanders. In particular, speakers opposite have talked about youth engagement. Well, what is wonderful about this piece of legislation is that it is different. It is different for youth. We have now, and I would like to refer members to the part of the bill regarding youth engagement, but we have a specific reference that will require the Mayor to be able to take into account youth views and set up a mechanism that will enable them to engage with youth. That is a significant change for the people and the youth of Auckland. Now, members opposite wanted a defined structure within the legislation, and what they failed to show and what they failed to represent was how they would have actually put that structure within the legislation, given there were so many different submissions on it. But, Mr Speaker, what we also have here is greater local democracy. And I want to talk about that for a second. We currently have a community board system within Auckland whereby the community boards have been at the whim of councillors. Some areas of Auckland have not been able to have even community boards. Well, Mr Speaker, and I talk to members opposite when I say this, members opposite have slip-slided on their positions so often. And when it came to how many local boards we would have, this side of the House was very clear. We stood for 21. That side of the House wanted 6 to 9. And I challenged Mr Twyford to stand up and talk about the number of local boards that he actually wanted to deliver for Auckland. So this side's very clear. We're putting in a structure that will finally guarantee communities of Auckland local board structures. The other key point about these local board structures, if you listen to the opposition, you wouldn't actually be listening to what's actually in the legislation. There are several key protections. The first is a principle of subsidiarity. So for those members opposite that talk about local boards' functions and powers being stripped away, they have not read the last piece of legislation or even this piece of legislation. There's a clear principle of subsidiarity which says that any decision-making goes to the local board unless the governing body can prove that it's regional. Finally, members can understand that actually that is very significant. Secondly, there's a very...
Point of order, the Honourable Parakura Horomia.
Mr Speaker, this is a very, very serious debate, and I am concerned that the Minister is bringing the House into disrepute by texting while this discussion is going on.
I'm the judge of that. Thank you. I'll ask the member to sit. We have a debate going. It's a robust debate. There's a lot of order. I'm on my feet. There's a lot of interjections that aren't actually related to the debate that we're having. And I'll decide the relevance or otherwise and what the Minister's doing. Nikki Kay has the call.
Mr Chair, as I was saying, we are moving from a system of community boards which have been at the whim of councillors, which have had no power, to a system of local boards whereby there's a principle of subsidiarity which will enable decisions to go locally unless the governing body can prove that they're regional. The other key protection, the other key facet of this legislation, which is crucial, which members opposite haven't picked up yet because they failed to turn up to Select Committee a number of times, is that it is a collaborative process. A local board plan is...
Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Honourable Steve Chair.
The Speaker opposite knows she can't mention the presence of members at Select Committee or the absence thereof.
Yep. There is a clear ruling you can't refer to members who aren't present. So I'll ask the member to continue. She has a minute remaining.
So, Mr Chair, there's a local board plan process whereby for the first time there will be a requirement to have an agreement between the governing body and the local boards, and there will be a dispute resolution process whereby if there is a disagreement. So that protection will provide for those local boards to be able to actually get what they want at a local board level. But, Mr Speaker, this is a historic day. We've made many changes to this legislation. I look forward to talking in detail about all of the changes because members opposite are just reading their previous speaking notes. They haven't actually looked at what happened during the Select Committee process. They're talking slogans like lack of democracy, which we've already talked about. But I look forward to addressing issues such as privatisation in other speeches that I'll be giving. To be clear to the people of Auckland that this is a historic day. We're going to have a system of one regional entity, one mayor, that will finally be able to deliver from a cultural, social, economic and environmental perspective to the people of Auckland.
I call Carol Beaumont.
Mr Chair, thank you very much for the call. As an Auckland MP, I rise to speak with considerable sadness about the Local Government Auckland Law Reform Bill, and today isn't quite the historic day I think that the member opposite was referring to, because we are in the committee stages at this stage on this bill. As an Auckland Member of Parliament, this bill affects me. It affects my access to representation in local government. It affects the services that are provided to me, to my neighbours, to the electorate I work in, to the people of Panmure, people of Ellerslie, the people of Onehunga. And you, across the House, members are fooling themselves if they believe that those people believe the sort of rhetoric about this is a great